Hello, I'm Ramjee Chandran, welcoming you back to Season 1, The Early History. If you are here for the first time, happy to have you here. We are in Episode 16, The Chalukyas, Part 3. For a quick recap, the history of the Gangas, who ruled from the 4th century to around the early 11th century, was intertwined with the fortunes of the kings of the large nations to whom they played feudatory, the Kadambas, the Chalukyas, and then the Rashtrakutas. So in Season 1, I tell the story of the Gangas and the stories of the empires that they served. Understanding the whole picture is so important to understanding the Gangas and therefore understanding Bangalore as we know it today. In previous episodes, I have walked you through the Ganga kings to the end of Sri Purusha and also through the Kadamba dynasty. And now we find ourselves looking at the Chalukya dynasty, Part 3, the rise and fall of Mangalesha. I pause to express my thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group, whose support makes this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. The last episode told the story of the second king of the Chalukyas, Kirtivarman I, son of Pulakesin I, the founder of the House of the Chalukyas. Kirtivarman was an expansionist on steroids. In a few years, he took a run at several small provincial principalities and kingdoms and rolled them up into what became the Chalukyan Empire that stretched across a large landmass. And when he expanded the new nation, he astutely focused on taking over key ports along the west coast. The Konkan coastal ports were valuable for their international trade. Among them was Goa, known then as Revati Dvipa, or simply Revati. Later in this episode, this event repeats because Mangalesha continued the campaign and concluded it successfully. In time, the Chalukyas would expand all the way into southern Gujarat for similar reasons. Kirtivarman also pursued his father's passion for architecture, building cities and towns, and culture. Architecture and the arts inspire each other, if they are not the same thing, and one of the most striking and unique things about Chalukya aesthetic heritage is sculpture. Later in Season 1, I plan to devote an episode to talk about the brilliant art and architecture of the Chalukyas because that's not something that should be glossed over. But for now, let's continue with their political history. When Kirtivarman I died, his younger brother Mangalesha took the throne. By arrangement between the brothers, he did so as regent, acting king, until Kirtivarman's son Pulakesin II came of age and could become the king in his own right. Mangalesha had a lot of experience with governance. When Kirtivarman was on his military campaigns, it was Mangalesha who ruled by proxy in his place to fulfill the day-to-day duties of the king. As it turns out, this relationship was deeper and more far-reaching. During his time, many of the grants, construction projects, temples, cave temples, and the regular ones were all the work of Mangalesha. So ruling the kingdom as a regent was in every way only a continuation of his responsibilities. The reign of Mangalesha is a curious case of so little known about a man during whose reign so much happened. So let's get into it. It was the year 597 or 591 or 592 by some historians when Mangalesha succeeded his brother. The question that seems to exercise epigraphists is whether Mangalesha came to the throne as king or merely as regent. Now, this might seem completely trivial and just a blip in history so many centuries later, but when you are in the business of recording history, every event, no matter when it happened, must be treated with the same interest as a political event that happens in the present. The conclusion that epigraphist K.V. Ramesh reached on the subject was derived from a careful look at the text and tone of the inscriptions, specifically the plates at Nerur, Marathur, Aihole, and the Mahakuta pillar. This historian held that it was likely that Kirtivarman probably had no children for a long time and had come to believe that he may not have any kids at all. So he had actively associated his brother Mangalesha in the running of the kingdom. It's possible that they took turns at the duties of running the country and waging war and expanding the kingdom. So it is logical to assume that in the absence of his own children, Kirtivarman was boiling up to nominating Mangalesha as his heir. But then, later in life, Kirtivarman did have a son, and he named him Pulakesin II after the boy's grandfather, and the infant now became crown prince, heir to the throne. Now, when Kirtivarman died and Mangalesha took over, regent or otherwise, he could not participate in the line of succession as Pulakesin II was destined to the throne as soon as he came of age. Still, Mangalesha stepped into the job and continued doing what he had been doing for years. Mangalesha was always an aggressive, can-do type of individual who was a visible ruler and attracted a lot of attention. Only a few years after he took over, Mangalesha attacked the Chalukys. Now the Chalukys were a significant kingdom. They ruled the kingdom of Malwa, an area that lay over parts of what we know today as Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra. Their legacy included early work in the Ellora caves, going by the coins issued by them. Now they are the ones behind the famous cave temples at Elephant at Mumbai Harbour and several stunning cave temples at Ellora, including the well-known Cave 21, also called the Rameshwar Cave. Malwa, as the kingdom of Malwa, had been around since 350 AD, ruled by various kings and families, and in 550 AD came into the hands of the newly established House of Kalachuri, headed by their first king, Krishna Raja. Now, Buddhi Raja was the third king of the Kalachuris, and because of Mangalesha, he was the last one. So, sometime before the date of the inscription 602 AD, Kirtivarman laid siege to Malwa and attacked Buddhi Raja. Now, by records, Buddhi Raja had only just taken over as king in 600 AD, so that leaves either 600 AD or 601 AD when Mangalesha could have attacked the Kalachuris. Again, there's a little quibble as to whether Mangalesha attacked the Kalachuris, because the Nerur plates uses the Sanskrit word Vidravya, which means to repel or drive out, and this one word might come to mean that the Kalachuri Buddhi Raja was the attacker and Mangalesha was the defender. But then again, this might be down to semantics when read with the fact that Mangalesha had looted the Kalachuris, which means he went over there. By this business of looting, it was not really an invasion for the annexation of territory, it was only a raid, and Mangalesha had said, stripped Buddhi Raja of all his wealth and all his women and made off with the whole lot. It is likely that Mangalesha had timed this raid well because the new king had just taken over and was probably still coming to grips with his new role as king. The fact that Mangalesha, despite his victory in the battle, did not annex any territory could well mean that he saw an opportunity for loot. And this might be borne out because in later Kalachuri inscriptions, there was a lot of boast about this being a glorious time for Buddhi Raja, so clearly he continued to rule after Mangalesha was done with him. But something else seemed to have happened to Mangalesha after this campaign. I will take a break now, but when I come back, a look at Mangalesha's self-realization, a possible cause for his downfall. Right after this.
Just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
Hello, I'm back. Some say Mangalesha found spirituality. Maybe it was that he had come to the realization that he was now a king and not merely the king's younger brother and the next king's uncle. Whatever it was, his demeanor seemed to turn introspective in a way that contemplated his own importance, self-importance, to be clear. He returned straight home to Vatapi right after the Kalachuri campaign. He wanted to erect what was termed as a pillar of piety at the Makuteshwara temple, which is barely 2 kilometers in a straight line from the fort. And this resulted in the creation of his renowned Mahakuta pillar inscription, a source of much of the history related to Mangalesha. The reason I talk about this moment in Mangalesha's history is that the Mahakuta pillar appears to be a monument to Mangalesha's hubris if you read some parts of it. Here's why. The inscription starts with a somewhat bald statement that after the death of his older brother, he became king. No hyperbolic tears, none of the usual high emotions associated with the humility of the new position. Significantly, there was no mention of his position as regent or caretaker king or whatever it was. And now there was every sign of self-aggrandizement. Here are many examples of this. The inscription extols his virtue in these ways. He was a devoted follower of the gods, brahmanas, and elders. He was the shining example of the Chalukya family. He possessed qualities such as political acumen, politeness, knowledge, liberality, kindness, and civility. He was admired by warriors and respected by vultures as he fed them with the bodies of enemies slain in battle. Surrounded by young women, he was known for his charming qualities. His reputation was enhanced by his religious merit. He was the embodiment of wealth, and as a king he was compared to a cluster of water lilies. His valor, supported by well-informed spies, installed fear in his enemies. He was a king with the courage and the speed of a fierce wild boar. He excelled in giving and seeking counsel, espionage, selecting messengers, negotiating the peace, waging wars, pitching camps, leading expeditions, attacking enemies and invading territories. And then if this was not enough, the composer of the inscription moves the praise into high gear and brings divinity into it. Speaking about Mangalesha, he writes, "He was invincible like the god king Mahendra. He was unconquered like Rama. He was munificent like Sibi. He was truthful like Yudhishthira. He was possessed of fortune like Vasudeva. He was equal to Brihaspati in intellect. He was as profound as the ocean. He was equal to the goddess of earth in forbearance. He was an ornament of accomplished men." All in all, a really great guy. Mangalesha clearly had developed this definite tendency to bestow grand praise upon himself regarding his personal abilities, attributes, character, and accomplishments. But for all his hubris, though, there is evidence that Mangalesha did very well to further the cause of the growth of the Chalukyas. The more sober and believable Aihole inscription of Ravi Kirti doesn't dismiss him lightly. For example, the poet took time to praise Mangalesha for his efforts at capturing Goa, known then as Revati Dvipa. Ravi Kirti's eulogistic description was important from many points of view. It gives us some clues about all the other history that was happening at the time. His words, "With its bright banners, the great army quickly ascended the island of Revati, reflected in the waters of the great ocean, appearing like forces of Varuna arriving at his command." Now, the underlying meaning behind this is that Mangalesha had a navy, and this campaign to invade Goa was done by sea. The scene of the naval battle must have been quite something. Although it is not known where exactly, on what beach in Goa Mangalesha's forces landed, it must have been terrifying for both sides. In the context of the sea, the term Dvipa literally means island, but could also describe a peninsula that extends into the sea. To capture such a promontory, a siege from the sea would have been inevitable, but also unexpected. Attacks from the sea were not exactly common in that day. Also, the weaponry of the time would have lacked range, meaning that they had limited means to hurl projectiles at advancing ships that were pitching and yawing on the waves. Their weapons would largely have been used for close or closer contact. And this means that invading armies, usually cavalry, elephants, and infantry, would first have to get close. So fortresses and other fortifications were used to impede the advance of invading, approaching armies. Natural barriers would have been erected to thwart these kinds of invasions by land. But by the sea route, invaders can land armies within striking distance, the time to battle being greatly shortened. So on the day of battle, Mangalesha's armies arrived by sea. Once again, it must have been quite a sight. It would not have been a small commando force that landed on the shore, but an entire army. The scale of an invasion, no matter how predictable the outcome, would have been as noisy and as terrifying as one by land. The beating of drums, the sounding of sharp, loud horns, and the shouts of charging men armed with swords and spears, adrenaline flowing, driving their one agenda: kill or be killed. Once the promontory, the piece of land jutting into the sea, was taken, the army was able to get over the water and onto land with what was described as the help of bridges made of boats. This is a reference to pontoon bridges, where access like a road is created by tying boats together and then laying flat navigable objects like planks across them so vehicles and troops can move over. Note that these terms and military strategies are in use today. Pontoon bridges are routinely visible at military training camps, for example, Bangalore's Ulsur Lake, a portion of which is used by the Madras sappers for their training. Mangalesha, through this process, was able to invade and take Goa. But as part of the invasion, records show that Mangalesha had also defeated and killed a member of the Chalukya family, his own family, a man called Swami Raja, who had been appointed as governor of the Konkan areas ruled by the Chalukyas at the time. So it was likely that he had turned rogue, he was in rebellion, and this was a bad idea and a bad day for Swami Raja. Now, it is a matter of note that Mangalesha had a naval fleet at his command. The possession of a credible navy would have been a powerful thing, the naval fleet playing a crucial role in the capture of Revati. The Aihole inscription does not directly reference this navy, but later inscriptions from the Kalyani Chalukyas, who are known for more accurate historical accounts of the Vatapi Chalukyas, clearly mention Mangalesha's naval capabilities. For example, this one, part of which I quoted a moment ago. The island of Revati was captured by him who had the might to occupy all the islands on his army, crossing the ocean with the help of bridges constructed with boats. Then again, a naval fleet in the 7th century is not all that surprising, considering that the western seacoast of India had seen maritime activity for centuries, replete with tales of piracy upon merchant ships, sometimes by kingdoms with access to the sea, and more often by kingdoms having an armed naval presence to protect their maritime interests. So it is likely that the Chalukyas would have had such a presence, and they could have built upon this ability and added to the war machine. In an earlier episode titled How the Deccan Kings Got Rich, I covered this subject based on my conversation with Dr. Sunil Gupta, formerly of the Allahabad Museum, on his paper titled Piracy and Trade on the West Coast of India, 1 to 250 AD. Listen to it, it's a hoot. Sometimes we better understand the importance of something when we look at it holistically. So when you consider the significance of Mangalesha possessing a navy and using it to invade the country of Goa, the word that springs to mind is enterprising rather than surprising. The taking of Revati done and Swami Raja killed, Mangalesha set up the new administration of the island. One day in the early 20th century, a Portuguese man who was ploughing the hilly land that he owned near Goa dug up an inscription. He kept it with him for 12 years and then gave it to the possession of the epigraphists. And this came to be known as the Goa Grant. And in this inscription, the Goa Grant was a reference to a Satyashraya Dhruvaraja Indravarman. It was Indravarman who Mangalesha left in charge of Goa as governor, and by this, Goa remained the property of the Chalukyas for the remainder of Mangalesha's rule. Now, as to who Indravarman was, Judging by the Goa grant, Indravarman had made a gift of villages. He used the Chalukyan Baraha seal and he was appointed as viceroy. These, among other indications of his status, helps us to conclude that Indravarman was an important figure, quite easily assumed to be a member of the Chalukyan family. But how important was he? How high up? Of the many theories that have been offered as to who it was, and many rejected, about his identity, one is that Indravarman was Mangalesha's son. And this brings us to the crux of Mangalesha's problem. In the course of Mangalesha's reign, it is clear that he ruled with passion and, importantly, ownership. But maybe the sense of ownership became a little too real, and soon Mangalesha began to have designs on the throne. Dynastic designs, I mean. He was already king, but now he wanted his own son to be named crown prince. But waiting in the wings was the heir apparent to the throne, Kirtivarman's son, Pulakesin II, who was not going to be easily precluded from succession. It is not clear when exactly Mangalesha decided to go back on his promise to his brother, if there was a promise to begin with, but it is very likely that there was a promise and that Mangalesha had changed his mind. The signs were evident from the start. The excessive self-praise in public inscriptions, for instance. Historically, it has often been observed that the less secure and less legitimately entitled a ruler is, the more pronounced their self-aggrandizement tends to be. And considering that Mangalesha had acted as co-king for so many years and then as king for many more, it is understandable that he must have felt that this was his and to be passed on to his own line of succession. When exactly the unrest started at home is not known. When did the young Pulakesin II start to feel threatened by his uncle? When did he know that Mangalesha was not going to give him the throne? The Aihole inscription suggests that it started early. For example, verse 14 reads, "When his elder brother's son named Pulakesin, of a dignity like Nahusha's, was coveted by fortune, and finding his uncle to be jealous of him thereat, had formed the resolution to wander abroad as an exile." The Sanskrit word used to describe Pulakesin's exile was aparadam, meaning to debar or to cut off or to banish, to exile. And the word aparadacharam is used to describe a prince who, dispossessed of his kingdom, wanders about in foreign countries. In the Yajurveda, there's a hymn that is weirdly specific, directed at a king who might be approached by another who has lost his kingdom and how he might help. It goes like this: "If ever there should seek shelter with him by one who is being shot out from his kingdom, saying, 'Act for me in such a manner that I might regain this kingdom,' he should let him depart in his direction. So verily he recovers his kingdom." By this, Ravi Kirti was suggesting that Pulakesin, who was either exiled or banished by Mangalesha, who wanted him gone, or was afraid of Mangalesha for the same reason, or simply that he knew he needed to find a way to get his kingdom back by force if need be, left the Chalukyan lands. And then he gathered the support of kings who would assist him in his quest to regain his throne. The only record of what happened after is pretty much what was recorded in Ravi Kirti's Aihole inscription. And it read, "That Mangalesha, whose great strength became on all sides reduced by the application of the powers of good counsel and energy gathered by Pulakesin, abandoned, together with the effort to secure the kingdom for his son, both that no mean kingdom of his and his life." History will always know Mangalesha as a great conqueror who did a lot to push the boundaries of his kingdom in the northern region, extending into present Gujarat and Kathiawad. Mangalesha's dream of conquering the north of India and then installing a victory pillar at the banks of the Ganges, or Bhagirathi as it was called then, never came to fruition. For all his campaigns and conquests and all his achievements, in not more than a dizzying decade, Mangalesha's hubris, his ambition, his dreams of his own dynasty, and yes, his life, came to an end at the hands of his beloved brother's son, who killed him in battle. and in 609 AD came to the throne of the Chalukyas one of the greatest of their kings, a young man of 25, Pulakesin II. Hit that bell icon or whatever it is that your favorite podcast platform has by way of subscribing, and you should get an alert every time a new episode airs. And that new episode will be the next one, the Chalukyas Part 4, next on the list, Pulakesin II. And history is going to get a whole lot pacier. Get ready for that. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.